Thank you. Thank you, Cam. That was really nice. Do I have to speak up? Can you guys hear? Does the mic project? How's my hair? Okay. Thank you. So it's such an honor to be here back at Cluj, my old haunt. Thank you guys for having me. It's so nice of you. So as Cam said, I'm Alexa Roman, and I work at Carbon 5 as a product designer up in San Francisco. We also have an office here in LA. But before Carbon 5 and before Cluj, I actually worked in filmic set design. And I also have a degree in art, and I spent a brief period of time in architecture school. That's a long story. But my background is in physical design. And so when I started thinking about this theme of aesthetics, I couldn't keep it to the pixels. So this talk is about my vision for user experience design. I used aesthetics as a starting point. So at my firm, we do design and development for software. So very much for us, software runs the world. But that's not actually true. In software design, we have this role called the user experience designer. And that person does wireframing and helps with the strategy of the whole product. But the product has more beyond it, right? There's a context, there's an environment. As Cam said, there's context, artifacts, signals that people experience beyond this digital thing. And that's what the user experience is. So for the purpose of this talk, the definition I'm going to use for aesthetics is the branch of philosophy dealing with beauty and artistic taste. And like I said, I use that as a starting point, so stay with me. This is me at Carbon 5. So I'm a digital product designer, which means I mostly work with pixels and screens. But a lot of our clients have touch points in the physical world. And so while my area is the digital realm, there's an opportunity beyond that, and we've started to have these conversations. And this is me in the art department. So I used to work in the art department of films and television shows. And the art department is responsible for everything you see besides an actor, which probably most of you haven't noticed at all, which is fine, but they aid the storytelling, and I think without them, the understanding of the story would be very difficult. And so the art department is the production designer at the head of that, and he's translating the director's vision. And so my role was to translate the production designer's vision. And at the helm of that is the director for films, and in television, the creator, the showrunner, the head writer. So I went to film school, and back when I was in film school, this was one of my heroes. This is Francois Truffaut. And Truffaut is one of the French New Wave filmmakers. And the New Wave filmmakers stood for energetic storytelling, self-expression. They had a unique perspective, and they wanted to share it through their work. But Truffaut wasn't only a filmmaker. He was also a writer. He wrote for the publication Cahiers du Cinéma, and he talked about his work and the work of his peers. Truffaut is what's known as an auteur. He's one of the original auteurs. And an auteur is just the French word for author, and it means someone who injects their perspective in their work. It's more substantial than a visionary because it implies an ability to execute, which Truffaut did very well. And the auteurs employ this technique known as mise en scène. Mise en scène is the intentional construction of a visual story with actors, camera, techniques, scenic elements, lighting, all of the pieces you have at your disposal as a filmmaker. And Truffaut wrote an article called A Certain Tendency of the French Cinema in Cahiers du Cinéma, and he talks about this idea of mise en scène and how different it is from metteur en scène, excuse my horrible French accent, which is just arranging elements, just the director who sets a stage. They're very different because the auteur is injecting his perspective in his work so that his work stands alone. You can tell that Truffaut's films are Truffaut's films, but they're not Spielberg's films. And in 2009, the tech writer and UI designer John Gruber gave a talk about this. And it's called The Auteur Theory of Design. And in this talk, he had a thesis. The quality of any collaborative creative endeavor can only be as good as the taste of the person in charge. And then he reframes it through film and says, the quality of any collaborative creative endeavor can only be as good as the person who has final cut. Sorry. Technical difficulties. It just goes on its own. Anyway, These are some of the design auteurs. Gruber's right. There are many design auteurs, and these are some of mine. So the Eames, who you saw briefly, can't get them back, but they're interdisciplinary designers, right? They did furniture, homes, films, graphics, textiles. Richard Neutra, very famous LA architect, did buildings around the world, much of Los Angeles. He was known for collaborating with his clients. Steve Jobs, notoriously hard on his team. But we use his products every day. We're using one right now. So these are people that are auteurs in our world, and they are placing their perspective through real-world artifacts, products, services, systems. These are people that are driving the world forward with intention. These intentional environments need to be driven by an auteur. This is someone who can really think through the entire experience. Right now, we have this term of user experience design, but it's not actually someone thinking through this environment. If you think about your experience in the world, you're interacting with things created by many designers: architects, urban planners, industrial designers, graphic designers, web designers, lighting designers, fashion designers. The list goes on and on. And this just becomes an amalgam of different artifacts, not an intentionally constructed experience. So take Saarinen's building. This is the TWA terminal at JFK Airport, built for TWA, now in operation by JetBlue, and maybe going to become a hotel. It's hard to say what's going to happen to it in the future. But this is an extraordinary structure. It looks like on the outside like a bird ready to take flight. The curvature of the ceiling on the inside is just extraordinary. Large windows, built-in furniture. It's just an amazing piece of architecture. But this is your view when you arrive at JFK Airport at the time that this terminal was created. Not exactly comparable to Saarinen's vision. These are some of the artifacts that you might have experienced as a TWA passenger, all completely different, not the same as the terminal. And this is customs at JFK Airport. Really depressing, really a depressing environment. If only Saarinen had touched this experience. Back to Gruber's thesis. The quality of the creative collaborative endeavor comes down to the person with Final Cut. The Final Cut is never left to someone, any of these designers. It's never left to one person. But it could be. We could have more auteurs driving a vision with an interdisciplinary team. This is a project that I'm working on now. It's a healthcare app. And while I'm and my team, we're just working on the digital side, there's a whole other experience around it. So at the beginning, you have to find a doctor. Maybe you have to call. Maybe you have to email them. Maybe you have a web interface. Then you have to drive to the doctor, find parking, find the doctor's office in general, find the signage, experience what the doctor's office is like. Hopefully it's nice, like One Medical. Maybe you have to put on a hospital gown, depending what you're having done. Then maybe you experience the EMR, some sort of paper. And then you leave, you have to get a prescription, you have to call. There's many touch points here. And while we're starting to have these conversations, there's not one person driving this whole thing. This is Don Norman. He wrote an article called Why Design Education Must Change. And he talks about this exact thing. He says that designers, they're in charge of these larger experiences. They're being placed in these conversations, and they're not equipped to do it. This is something that needs to change. This role of the user experience designer, something that Don Norman originated at Apple, it needs to become broader. And the auteur's lens, I believe, can come from any of these disciplines. I don't think it has to be an urban planner or an architect or even someone trained in all of the disciplines. I think it could be a digital designer. Digital designers have a lot of advantages, just as all of these other fields do. We can learn fast, we can capture metrics easier, we know how to talk to customers, we do a lot of development online, so we know we have a lightweight material. I feel like digital designers are just as equipped to be an auteur as an architect, as a filmmaker. And they could very much lead an interdisciplinary team if they could express that vision. So this is a scene from Corning's Day Made of Glass video. I don't know if any of you guys saw it. It's a whole video about their vision for the future, very much dependent on glass, but it's an interesting portrayal of what they think the future will be. So I want to talk about a few ways I think we can start to achieve this. That idea of the glass with the interface on it, This has many designers involved. You have an architect, you have a fashion designer dealing with the lab coat, you have a UI designer dealing with the digital screen, there's a hardware designer dealing with the equipment in the room. Explore the full context of whatever you're working on. I'm trying to do this. Even if you can't affect change at all of the different levels of the experience, find out who can, see if you can talk to them. I think that that's something that we can start to do more often. Patrick, who's here in the room, he's an experiential designer. He's over there. He's starting to do this. And it's really important work to be done. This is the VW concept car. Pretty interesting vision for the future. One of my faves. Transportation is my thing. So another thing that we can do is start to cross-pollinate with other designers. Go to other events. Find out what their process is like. What do they value in their work and in the world? And see if you can talk with them. See what they're working on and if there's any cross-pollination that can happen. Sorry. This is John Underkoffler from Oblong. And John Underkoffler was the guy behind the Minority Report interface. Really incredible work. And first, that just started as an imaginary piece, went into a movie. And now they're in downtown LA actually making this thing happen. And this is something that, as a film major, I've really taken for granted. This fiction is not just fiction. Sometimes people see it, and they actually make that thing. And that's an incredible thing. It's important to do that experimentation, whether it's a concept video or a drawing or an actual motion picture. Doing that experimentation, do you actually want it to come true? Is Minority Report the future that we want? Or not? How do we come back from that? How do we pull ourselves in from the robots that are already taking over? So I have a couple things that I want to challenge you guys with. The first is to figure out what your lens is. What's your unique value in the interdisciplinary team? And the second is how can you take more ownership of our world? Where can you put intention in our world? And where can your work matter? This is the Neutra family motto. And it's engraved on their home in Silver Lake, if you ever go there, the VDL house. And it says, creators of this place, united by the idea that man's survival depends on his design. This is a very powerful thought. It's something that I try to live by, and I encourage you guys to do the same.